It's the eve of your wedding day, but there's no excitement bubbling up inside you, no butterflies, no dreams of a happily ever after. Instead, your parents have already sealed the deal years ago when you were just a wide-eyed 12-year-old, trading you off like a prized cow in a marketplace to seal some shady business alliance or grab a chunk of land. Your wedding night isn't a private, intimate moment. Oh no, it's a full-on spectacle where half the village piles into your bedroom to watch you and your new spouse climb under the covers, offering unsolicited advice and cheers like it's some kind of twisted sporting event. And if, by some miracle, you make it through the inevitable pregnancy that follows, because producing heirs is your primary job now, you're staring down a coin flip chance that your loving partner won't legally beat you senseless or worse. Welcome to the brutal world of medieval marriage, folks, where that famous vow, "till death do us part," wasn't some romantic whisper. It was a stark prediction of how short and miserable your union was likely to be. If you're sitting there swiping through dating apps, complaining about ghosting or bad first dates, buckle up. We're about to take a long, unflinching look at what our ancestors endured in the name of holy matrimony. By the time we're done, you'll be eternally grateful for every awkward breakup, every unmatched message, because compared to the medieval nightmare, modern romance is a walk in a rose garden. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Trust me, you'll want more history lessons that make you appreciate the present. Let's dive deep into this historical horror show, section by section, and uncover why you, me, or anyone from today wouldn't last a week in a medieval marriage. Sold off before you could even spell. Matrimony. The grim reality of child brides and arranged alliances. Let's kick things off with one of the most stomach-churning aspects of medieval marriage. The fact that it often started when one or both parties were still children. We're not talking about playful crushes or teenage sweethearts. Here, we're talking about literal kids being bartered like commodities in high-stakes family negotiations. To illustrate, let's travel back to the late 15th century and meet Margaret Beaufort, a woman who would go on to become the mother of the Tudor dynasty and one of England's most influential figures. But her path to power? It began with unimaginable trauma. At the tender age of 6, yes, 6, Margaret's guardians arranged her first marriage to John de la Pole. This wasn't born out of any affection or compatibility. It was a cold, calculated, real estate deal. Margaret came from a wealthy family with vast lands and titles, making her a golden ticket for anyone looking to boost their fortune. Her guardians saw an opportunity to secure control over her inheritance, and they pounced. Margaret herself? She was so young she barely understood what marriage even meant. She later claimed she never recognized the union at all, but that didn't matter to the adults pulling the strings. They knew exactly what they were doing, locking in wealth and alliances before fate could intervene. Fast forward 3 years, and the political landscape shifts like sand in a storm. Suddenly, that first marriage is inconvenient, so they dissolve it as if it never happened. Poof, annulled. And just like that, 9-year-old Margaret is on the market again. This time, she's sold off to Edmund Tudor, a man twice her age, at 24. Now, medieval canon law did have some guidelines here. Technically, girls could be married as young as 12 and boys at 14, but there was an unspoken and sometimes spoken rule that consummation, the physical act that sealed the marriage, should wait until the girl was at least 14 to give her body time to mature. But Edmund, he wasn't one for patience. Within months of their wedding, when Margaret was still just 12, she was pregnant. The physical and emotional toll this took on her young body would haunt her for life, but we'll get to that later. Margaret's story might sound extreme, but it was far from unique in the upper echelons of society. Take Isabella of Valois, the daughter of King Charles VI of France. In 1396, at the ripe old age of 6 years and 5 days, she was married off to King Richard II of England in a lavish ceremony that was more about forging a truce between warring nations than anything resembling love. Her trousseau, The bundle of goods she brought into the marriage included not just jewels and fabrics, but her actual dolls and a set of miniature silver furniture for them. It was like dressing up a child for a playdate, except this playdate came with lifelong consequences. The marriage contract explicitly stated that consummation wouldn't happen until Isabella turned 12, which even by medieval standards was acknowledged as pushing the boundaries of decency. But why wait? Because her tiny body couldn't handle it, and everyone knew it. Yet, the alliance was too valuable to delay. Now, before you write off these parents and guardians as heartless monsters, let's add some context. Medieval Europe was a brutal place. Plagues ravaged populations, wars erupted over the slightest provocation, and political betrayals could topple families overnight. In this chaotic world, children, particularly daughters with inheritances, weren't seen as innocent kids to nurture. They were economic assets, walking lottery tickets that needed to be cashed in quickly before disaster struck. A well-timed marriage could secure land, titles, military support, or trade routes for generations. Delaying meant risking everything. What if the girl died young? What if a rival family swooped in? Parents played the marriage market like modern-day stock traders, hedging bets and diversifying alliances, and it was all perfectly legal. The church, which held sway over marriage as a sacrament, set minimum ages but enforced them loosely, especially when nobility or royalty was involved. Dispensations, special permissions, were handed out like candy if the union served a greater political purpose. Money and power always trumped morality. But here's a crucial reality check to balance the shock. These child marriages were predominantly a problem for the elite. Peasants and the emerging middle class couldn't afford such games. They needed their kids working the fields or apprenticing in trades. Most common folk married in their late teens or early 20s, often after courting and with some say in the matter. For them, marriage was about practical partnership, sharing labor, raising kids, surviving harsh winters. But for the Margarets and Isabellas, their childhoods were sacrificed on the altar of family ambition, and this was just the opening act in a lifetime of marital misery. As the Middle Ages waned into the early modern period, attitudes slowly shifted toward older marriage. Ages, influenced by Renaissance humanism and reforming church doctrines. But for those trapped in the heart of the medieval era, the system remained a dark tradition, where innocence was a luxury few could afford. The wedding night spectacle. From private intimacy to public performance, okay, so you've been married off. As a kid, the vows are said, the feast is devoured. Now comes the part that's supposed to be magical, the wedding night. But in medieval times, magical meant something closer to mortifying public humiliation. Enter the bedding ceremony, a ritual so invasive it would make today's most voyeuristic reality TV shows look tame and respectful. Here's how it typically unfolded. After the wedding banquet, where everyone gorged on roasted meats, ale, and spiced. Wines the entire guest list. Friends, family, distant relatives, even nosy neighbors would form a procession to escort the newlyweds to their bedroom. This wasn't a polite drop-off with hugs and well wishes. It was active participation. The women of the party would whisk the bride away first, helping or forcing her to undress, comb out her hair, and slip into a nightgown while peppering her. With advice on wifely duties. Think everything from how to please her husband to tips on conceiving quickly. Meanwhile, the men did the same for the groom, often with rowdy jokes and backslaps, before parading him into the chamber and tucking him into bed beside his bride. But the fun didn't stop there. A priest would often step forward to bless the marriage bed, sprinkling holy water and praying for fertility and healthy heirs. Then came games like the stocking toss. Bridesmaids and groomsmen would perch on the bed's edges and hurl the couple's discarded stockings at them. A hit meant good luck, and supposedly predicted who'd marry next. It was like a bizarre, underwear-themed carnival game, all while the couple lay there, exposed and awkward. For high-profile unions, especially among royalty and nobility, things escalated. Witnesses didn't just leave after the games, they stuck around to verify consummation. They might draw the bed curtains for a shred of privacy during the act itself. Medieval folks did have some boundaries, but they'd linger just outside, listening and waiting for evidence, like bloodied sheets or verbal confirmation. Why? Because in this era, marriage wasn't fully binding until consummated. Without it, the union could be annulled, alliances shattered, and inheritances disputed. Take the 1468 wedding of Margaret of York to Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy. This was a mega-political merger between England and Burgundy, and chroniclers documented every detail of the bedding ceremony. Nobles crowded the room, the pressure immense. If things didn't happen, years of diplomacy could unravel. This tradition wasn't some universal kink. It had practical roots in a society where marriage was a legal contract above all. No sex meant no valid marriage, no legitimate kids, no secured power, but it varied wildly by region, class, and era. In rural peasant weddings, it might be more symbolic, a quick escort to the door with blessings and bawdy songs. While in Scandinavian countries, public bedding was sometimes legally required to validate the union. Even as time marched on, the custom lingered. It wasn't until the 17th century that figures like King Charles I of England outright refused, barring the door and demanding privacy. By then, it was fading, but for centuries, it endured as a tool of control, turning the most personal moment into a communal audit. And for child brides like Isabella of Valois, the ceremony was a cruel reminder that their playtime was over. At 6, Isabella went through this ritual, dolls in tow, knowing she was now property. It's stuff that doesn't make the glossy history books, but it reveals marriage as a mechanism of ownership where privacy was sacrificed for proof of possession. Childbirth, playing Russian roulette with every pregnancy, if you've survived the child. Marriage, and the embarrassing bedding. Congratulations! You're now expected to start popping out babies immediately. But in the Middle Ages, pregnancy wasn't a glowing, joyful phase. It was a high-stakes gamble where death was a constant player. Let's circle back to Margaret Beaufort for a heartbreaking example of how this played out. Pregnant at 12 by her impatient husband Edmund, Margaret's world crumbled when he died of the plague 7 months in. Widowed and terrified, she embarked on a perilous winter journey to Pembroke Castle for safety, her belly swelling with each jolting step. On January 28, 1457, at just 13, labor began. Her confessor, Bishop John Fisher, later described it as a miracle that a baby could be born of so little a personage, code for her underdeveloped body being utterly unprepared. The delivery was agonizing, likely involving crude tools and no anesthesia, leaving permanent damage. Despite remarrying twice more, Margaret never conceived again. That one birth rendered her infertile, her young frame scarred beyond repair. This wasn't rare. It's just well documented because of Margaret's status. Medieval childbirth mortality was staggering. Roughly 1 in 3 women died during labor, or from postpartum complications like infection or hemorrhage. Your odds were worse than many modern extreme sports. Medical help often made it deadlier. Midwives or physicians might bleed a laboring woman to balance humors or use birthing chairs, wooden contraptions that forced gravity-assisted delivery but frequently caused tears or prolapses. Herbal remedies and prayers were the best medicine available, ineffective against sepsis or breech births. Even queens weren't spared. Isabella of Aragon, married young and dead at 18 after a multi-day labor in 1490, suffered despite royal care. Noble women faced relentless pressure. Produce heirs, especially sons, or be deemed a failure. Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of history's powerhouses, endured 10 pregnancies between 1137 and 1152, each a brush with death. Average noblewomen might face 8 to 15 births, their bodies worn down by constant cycling. Blame always fell on the woman. Medieval. Science ignored male infertility, attributing everything to cold wombs or sin. Teens suffered most. Their hips and organs weren't fully formed. Survival meant lifelong issues, chronic pain, fistulas, incontinence. Marriage equated to serial death risks for family continuity. For women, vowing fidelity meant signing up for a lifetime, or shortened. 1. Of bodily peril. When your spouse has a license to harm, legal abuse, and the impossibility of escape made it through childbirth, now settle in for daily life with a partner who, by law, could beat, imprison, or kill you without consequence. Medieval doctrine of reasonable chastisement allowed husbands to discipline wives physically, with reasonable meaning anything short of murder, though even that was flexible. Sticks no thicker than a thumb. Fair game, per some legal texts. Henry VIII, straddling medieval and Renaissance eras, exemplifies the extreme. Frustrated by Anne Boleyn's failure to produce a male heir after their 1533 marriage, he fabricated charges of adultery, incest, and treason. Evidence? Thin to non-existent, but adultery by a queen was treason, threatening succession. Anne's trial was a sham. She was beheaded May 19, 1536. Catherine Howard, his fifth wife and a teenager, met the same fate in 1542 for alleged premarital affairs, executed at around 19. This wasn't Henry's madness, it was systemic. Eleanor Cobham, Duchess of Gloucester, was accused of witchcraft in 1441 by her husband's enemies, with his tacit approval, tortured and imprisoned for life. Divorce? Virtually impossible under Catholic rule. Annulments required proving invalidity, like non-consummation, via humiliating exams where women proved virginity publicly. Processes dragged years, costing fortunes most couldn't afford. Wives had no legal personhood. Property, contracts, court testimony, all required husband approval. Imprison her in a tower? Legal? Fabricate crimes? Courts favored men. Women entered? Knowing this, but alternatives, spinsterhood, poverty, were worse. Henry didn't innovate. He exploited a patriarchal framework granting absolute power, where mercy was rare. The financial fiasco, marriage as a bankrupting business deal, at its core medieval marriage was economics, not emotion. Women as tradable goods in a high-risk market. Dowries were the entry fee. Brides' families paid grooms handsomely for taking her, often equaling massive sums today. Isabella d'Este's 15th century marriage negotiations spanned years, like a corporate takeover, with escalating bids of cash, jewels, lands, and favors. Dowries bought protection and status. Skimping meant daughters unmarried, social ruin, or wed poorly. Post-marriage, brides owned nothing. Even dowries transferred to husbands. Widows, often destitute, as estates went to male heirs, forcing hasty remarriages or convents for survival. Clever. Women like Margaret Beaufort navigated this, amassing wealth through strategic unions after her traumas. But most families faced ruin. Debts lingered generations, with no recourse if husbands abused. It was sanctified trafficking, women as currency and commodity. Romance? Irrelevant when survival hinged on fiscal savvy. Till death do us part, and death came calling. Early, the ironic mercy? These horrors were temporary. Marriages lasted 15 to 20 years on average, ended by death. Wives from births, husbands from wars, plagues, poor hygiene. The Black Death, 1347-1351, killed 30–60% of Europe, derailing countless unions mid-planning. Response: remarry swiftly, weeks or months, for economic necessity. Serial marriages were standard. Some women wed multiple times, accumulating or losing wealth. Nobles drafted backups. Contracts addressed when death struck. Ceremonies invoked souls, anticipating funerals. Blended families created tangled webs, half-siblings, steps, constant reshuffles. Emotional attachment, dangerous. In a death-prone world, yet people persisted. Marriage, flawed, beat solitude. In conclusion, why we're lucky to have swiped right on modernity. That's the unvarnished truth of medieval marriage. Kids auctioned, nights publicized, births deadly, abuse legalized, finances devastating, unions ephemeral. If this leaves you hugging your freedom, share it. Modern love's flaws pale against this historical abyss. Thanks for joining. Subscribe for more eye-openers.